Okay, close your eyes and picture ancient Egypt for just a second. What do you see? If you're imagining a majestic ride on a camel right past the Great Pyramids, well, you've actually just fallen for one of history's absolute biggest misconceptions. The crazy reality is there wasn't a single camel anywhere in Egypt when those pyramids were being built 4,500 years ago. It just goes to show that our modern pop culture image of this iconic civilization is honestly so often completely misunderstood.
So, welcome to this explainer. I am incredibly excited to dive into 4,000 years of the world's most resilient civilization with you today. We're going to totally forget that static, dusty textbook version of history, because the real story of ancient Egypt, it is this epic, dramatic cycle of unbelievable rises, terrifying collapses, and a cultural identity so ridiculously indestructible that it literally ended up conquering its own conquerors.
Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to break this overwhelming 4,000-year history down into 6 structured cycles. Forged by the Nile, the Age of Pyramids, Dark Ages and Rebirth, Egypt's Golden Empire, priests' corruption and collapse, and finally, conquered yet immortal.
Section 1. Forged by the Nile. You know, it's wild to think about, but ancient Egypt was actually born out of a massive climate crisis. Around 10,000 years ago, that whole region was a green, lush savanna. But as the Earth's axis slightly shifted, the summer rains just completely dried up. This massive change forced nomadic people right toward the one single life-saving water source left, the River Nile. It's just mind-boggling to step back and look at the sheer scale of time it took for this to happen. I mean, we're starting 19,000 years ago, with early nomads carving these incredible images of charging wild cattle into desert cliffs. Then skip to 7,000 years ago. As the rain is really dwindling, they're building stone circles like the Nabta Playa, which was basically Egypt's oldest calendar, just to predict the weather. And then finally, around 3000 BC, King Narmer steps up and unifies the northern and southern settlements, officially creating the world's very first nation-state.
So once they were unified, what actually kept them together? Well, they developed this incredibly unique cultural glue. Fun fact, the world's first writing system, those early hieroglyphs we all know, wasn't actually invented to write beautiful poetry. Nope, it was literally invented to do the math for taxes. You also had King Narmer establishing this ultimate, unquestionable authority as a living god king. Add to that the Nile River, which was now providing this massive, reliable agricultural surplus to feed everybody. And crucially, they developed this core belief where death wasn't the end, it was just a transition. But to make that transition, you needed a perfectly preserved body and all your earthly goods to survive in the next world.
Section 2. The Age of Pyramids.
So, with this unshakable belief system totally locked in, plenty of food to go around, and absolute faith in their god king, the Egyptians enter this era of just massive self-confidence. This is what pushes them to those unprecedented engineering heights everyone talks about. But listen, people love to bring up aliens or magic, but let's be real. This was pure, brilliant human innovation. In the beginning, tombs were just these simple, flat-roofed benches called mastabas. It took a true visionary, an architect named Imhotep, who, by the way, was just a commoner who hustled his way up to become prime minister, to look at a mastaba and say, what if we stack a bunch of these on top of each other for King Djoser? Boom! He creates the Step Pyramid, which was the largest stone building on planet Earth at the time. Imhotep was actually so revered for this absolute stroke of architectural genius that he was eventually worshipped as a god himself.
Now, if you really want to grasp the scale of this era, just look at this staggering number. 2.3 million. That is the exact number of massive limestone blocks used to build Khufu's Great Pyramid at Giza. It took over 20 years to finish. And, scratch what you've heard in the movies, it was not built by slaves. It was actually built by a highly organized, state-sponsored city of about 8,000 skilled workers. And they were living the good life, eating about 74 cattle and over 250 sheep and goats every single week. Talk about a massive barbecue, right? It was just an absolute masterpiece of ancient logistics.
Section 3. Dark Ages and Rebirth.
But as we know, absolutely nothing lasts forever. Toward the end of the 3rd millennium BC, the unthinkable actually happens. The Nile floods failed. The literal bedrock of their entire prosperity just dried up. This plunged the nation into total starvation, complete anarchy, and a horrific civil war. The people's absolute, unwavering faith in the pharaoh was completely shattered, and you can see this terrifying reality check perfectly reflected in their art.
From the Old Kingdom, you see these idealized depictions of paradise, tables just overflowing with endless fruit, wine, and meat. But then, fast forward to the Dark Age, and you find these gritty, haunting carvings of emaciated, starving people literally collapsing from hunger. It's incredibly dark, and it really shows you that chaos had fully knocked down Egypt's door.
So, with the pharaoh weakened, you suddenly have this massive power vacuum. And who steps in to fill it? These wildly ego-driven local warlords. Guys like Ankh-Tifi. Just listen to this ridiculously boastful quote he actually had inscribed in his own tomb. "I am a hero without peer, since nobody like myself existed before, nor will he exist." Talk about an ego, right? Well, warlords like him fought these incredibly vicious civil wars, which got so bad they even led to the unthinkable, the desecration of the ancient royal tombs at Abydos. The physical link to Egypt's sacred ancestors was literally severed in the fires of all this conflict.
To make matters worse, this weakened, totally divided Egypt is soon occupied up in the north by foreign rulers known as the Hyksos. And this is where history gets a little bit petty in a really fascinating way. Check out this incredibly passive-aggressive message. The Hyksos king Apophis actually sent a letter to the southern Egyptian leaders all the way down in Thebes, complaining that the bellowing of their sacred hippos, which were hundreds of miles away, mind you, was keeping him awake at night. It was a deliberate, calculated insult, likely meant to mock the powerful women of Thebes, and it sparked an absolute fury that ignited the brutal war for Egypt's rebirth.
But the Egyptians didn't just fight back with blind anger. They got smart. They fought back with reverse-engineered technology. You see, the Hyksos had brought in chariots and this state-of-the-art weapon, the composite bow, made from a wooden core, animal horn for that powerful snap, and sinew for sheer strength. It was basically the ultimate sniper weapon of the ancient world. So what did the Egyptians do? They adopted it, completely perfected it, and then turned it right back on their occupiers to drive them out and reunify the country.
Section 4. Egypt's Golden Empire.
Welcome to the New Kingdom. This is the absolute zenith of Egyptian culture, the Egypt you probably picture in your head. During this era, the empire exploded, expanding massively all the way from modern-day Syria down into Sudan. You had pharaohs like Imhotep III, who didn't even need to rely on military might. He literally ruled through sheer wealth, sending out these lavish golden gifts to secure powerful diplomatic marriages. And to protect all this insane wealth in the afterlife, they created the top-secret Valley of the Kings. What's truly amazing is that we actually have the micro-stories of the elite, skilled workers who built those very tombs. We have the surviving diaries of a master scribe named Amenemhat, and he writes about his heartbreaking prayers to the local gods as his eyesight starts failing him in his old age. It deeply, deeply humanizes this otherwise larger-than-life era.
Section 5. Priests, Corruption, and Collapse.
But all that incredible wealth brought a really fatal flaw. A massive influx of gold started pouring into religious institutions, specifically the Temple of Karnak, and it eventually completely undermined the state. We're talking deep corruption and literal labor strikes by starving tomb builders. And you can physically see this massive shift in power right there in the artwork. Traditionally, pharaohs were painted as these towering, giant superheroes while all their subjects were painted tiny. But by the late New Kingdom, you start seeing carvings where the high priest of Karnak is depicted exactly the same size as Pharaoh Ramesses IX. They even had the carvers put the pharaoh on a tiny little box just so he could technically be a fraction taller. You can't make this stuff up. The priests had essentially become full-time politicians vying for absolute power.
And this corruption eventually peaked in an almost unimaginable state-sanctioned crime. A high official named Buta Hamun was ordered by the high priest to go and restore the ancient tombs. But in reality, it was a highly systemic state-sponsored looting operation. Step 1, break the sacred royal seals. Step 2, completely strip the mummies of all their priceless gold masks and amulets to fund the corrupt state. And Step 3, haphazardly rewrap these once great kings in fresh linen and just hide them all away in a communal pile. They cynically destroyed the ultimate symbol of their entire culture, the royal afterlife, all for cold, hard cash.
Section 6. Conquered, yet immortal.
Weakened by all this internal division and a total loss of faith, Egypt eventually fell to successive waves of foreign invaders from all across the ancient world. But here is the absolute most fascinating part of this whole story. Notice the weird pattern among all their conquerors. The Kushite kings invade, but what do? They end up building pyramids and worshiping the Egyptian god Amun. Alexander the Great marches in, but he immediately marches out to an oracle so he can be crowned a traditional pharaoh and declared the son of Ammon. Then the Greek Ptolemaic dynasty takes over, and they start rebuilding native Egyptian temples and even adopt the pharaonic tradition of sibling marriage. It's incredible. Whoever conquered Egypt physically was ultimately conquered culturally by Egypt's ridiculously powerful, absorbing ideology.
And this epic cultural fusion totally peaked in the city of Alexandria. Founded by Alexander and built up by the Ptolemies, it became the bustling, cosmopolitan center of the ancient world. It brilliantly fused all that Greek philosophical knowledge with vast Egyptian agricultural wealth. It was home to the Great Library and the legendary lighthouse. It was definitely a brand new kind of Egypt, for sure, but one that was still deeply, fundamentally rooted in the magic of the Nile.
So, to summarize this incredible 4,000-year epic we've just journeyed through, ancient Egypt was forged by the environmental pressures of the Nile. It was violently, brutally tested by climate collapse and civil war. But ultimately, it was preserved by a cultural identity so totally indestructible that it outlasted literally all of its conquerors. They didn't just survive history, guys. They engineered a legacy that conquered time itself.
I really want to leave you with this one provocative thought to ponder today. If an ancient culture's survival ultimately relied not on its vast armies or its impenetrable fortresses, but on the unbreakable, absorbent power of its ideas, what does that say about the empires we're building today? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning everything, keep learning, and please never stop exploring the deep, fascinating layers of our shared human history.